This year I took a slightly different direction for my track riding season. I bought a Triumph Street RRR and threw some less track focused rubber on it, Pirelli's Diablo Rosso Corsa 2s. Having now done a few days on those tyres and riding in various conditions, in this video I wanted to go over my thoughts on them as well as touch on whether you could be overspending for the boots you put on your bike. So just to quickly tell you about the tyres, the Rosso Corsa 2s are new out for this year, unsurprisingly replacing the original Rosso Corsas which come out in 2010. They sit half a step behind the Diablo Super Corsa SP on the track performance scale, and they're designed for riders who do a good number of miles on the road as well as enjoy the occasional track day too. Now that comment in itself is likely going to have many track day riders running in the other direction, but stick with me. So the reason I picked these tyres up is because I wanted a tyre that performed well enough in the dry, but also meant the tyres weren't completely useless when it got wet or damp, because I had no intentions of buying spare wheels for this bike. As of this video, I've now done 4 days on these tyres, 2 in hot conditions, 1 in chilly conditions, and 1 that started out very wet and eventually dried out. The first day on them was back in June, and for those that saw my Street Triple Impressions video, you'll know that I was very impressed with these tyres early on. Going out for that first session with no warmers on, I was impressed at just how quickly they warmed up initially, and while I wouldn't say they were giving the best grip they could, they certainly didn't feel like cold race tyres, which if you've experienced, you'll know isn't a nice feeling. Throughout the 2 dry days I had them on, I was thoroughly impressed with what both the front and rear had to offer. I could feel a tiny bit of movement at the rear when at high lean on the side of the tyre, and this maybe could have been caused by the tyre getting a little bit too hot. But once I got the bike up off the side of the tyre, I could be at full throttle really early out of every corner and the tyres didn't budge. Though admittedly the Street Triple is only throwing out a little over 100 horsepower. The front is probably what I was most impressed with though. By the second day, and after I'd fixed a braking issue I'd had, I was really able to test the front at corner entry and lean on it with a fair bit of trail braking. It handled everything I was prepared to throw at it, and I found myself agreeing with the journalists that were saying the front tyre is nearly as good as a race tyre. In the chilly conditions, I was more concerned about tyre wear. Race tyres can be very susceptible to ambient conditions, and on some days you almost have to just accept poor wear because you have the wrong compound for the conditions you're riding in. But with the Rosso Corsas, they showed no signs of wearing any worse, even though the temperature had dropped by about 15 degrees Celsius. And finally, I got to test the tyres in the wet on my most recent day. Like I said, I bought the tyres with wet days in mind, and having read some of the blurb on the tyres, I knew that they used full silica compound in the middle on the front, and full silica in 2 portions of the rear tyre. And apparently this is the compound that's designed specifically for wet conditions. With that in mind, I felt good going out on them in the wet, knowing that, at the very least, they weren't going to be treacherous, like many race tyres are. And sure enough, after a few laps I had a good sense of what they could manage. Now, I was very aware that the final portion of the tyre was slick, so lean angles were very modest. But under moderate braking, the front tyre felt good, and the rear handled a fair bit of power before letting go. It's never going to be as good as a full wet race tyre, but as a tyre to let you get out on the track and still make use of the time you have that day, they served that purpose perfectly. An added bonus of this day is that as it started to dry out, I could slowly feel the grip coming back in, and by the time we reached the latter part of the day, I was back to feeling them at their best. So, as you can probably tell, I've been very impressed with these tyres so far, but it's once again brought up the question for me of whether certain riders are wasting their money on the stickiest rubber they can get their hands on. My short answer to that internal question is yes, I think they are. Race tyres are a fair bit more expensive, they don't last as long, they're more sensitive to incorrect pressures and conditions, and they'll have a ceiling that many riders aren't getting anywhere near. Having now run these tyres on middle fast group pace on a stock road bike while still feeling like there's more to get out of them, it's hard to make a case why any novice or intermediate rider would need more than this tyre has to give. The biggest case has to be safety, given that the higher ceiling theoretically means a higher margin for error, but if the rider is practicing good technique, then the ceiling on these tyres is still pretty darn high, which is going to keep you safe. And even then you have to assume that the slower rider can actually get the race tyre up to operating temperature in the first place. Now, I don't begrudge anyone for wanting super sticky race rubber. I've used it for the vast majority of my time on the track and even while I was coming up in the ranks too. But for those that are willing to consider going for something a little less race focused, be assured that a pair of tyres like these are still very capable track tyres and are going to give you an easier time in the longevity department while saving yourself a fair bit of money in the process. They're billed as a road and track tyre, but for a lot of riders on any track day they would serve as a good track only tyre too. And just to finish up, here's a couple of laps at Brands Hatch to see these tyres in action. Where do you stand on track riding rubber, and what do you think is best for different levels of rider? Tell us about it in the comments down below, and as always, if you like the video then please hit the button and subscribe to the channel for more performance riding advice and guides moving forward. Take care.